Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of this series, and this is the final series of me getting to 1,000 elo on chess.com, and in this episode I'm going to show you how I did it and my final games, so I hope you enjoy. At first I'll be showing you a game which led up to me getting to 1,000 elo, and then I'll show you the game which actually got me to 1,000 elo. So in this game got me to 973, so this is quite close to when I got to 950 elo. And in this game, I nearly lost. I was very close because I made a massive blunder, which you'll see, but I luckily recovered. So, started playing e4. My opponent played b6. I'm not sure what kind of opening this is. I didn't think it is opening. And then my opponent went for another fianchetto by moving his pawn to g6. Yeah, so next episode I'll be playing some different openings instead of just like normal e4, e5. So I move my knight to g5 to target this pawn. My opponent blocks my bishop's view of this f pawn by moving his pawn to e6. I just push my d pawn to help support the center and also to let my bishop out. Also, when my opponent moved this pawn, his queen started attacking my knight. So now that I've opened this up, my bishop defends this knight. My opponent kicks out my knight, so I move it back, and my opponent pushes his other pawn. I didn't think this was a very good idea for my opponent because it just weakens his whole position on his king's side. So I just develop my bishop, and my opponent pushes his pawn to d5, which he's trying to open up the center. So I just give him a check, and then my opponent blocks. See, as you can see here, his pawn structure isn't very good. Like, not all his pieces aren't really developed, and his king isn't secure at all. So after my opponent moved his pawn to c6, I just moved my bishop back. My opponent pushed his pawn. I moved my bishop back. And then my opponent, I didn't see my opponent could do this, but my opponent forked my knight and my bishop. So this is my first blunder. So after this, well, actually my opponent didn't fork it because I was able to take the pawn in my knight. I didn't see that. But then my opponent took with his bishop. I took, my opponent took. And as you can see here, my opponent is up a minor piece. So I'm a pawn for a minor piece. So after that, I push my a pawn, so in case my opponent tries to push these pawns to trap my bishop has somewhere to go. And then, so my opponent attacks my knight. I move it back to attack his queen. But then, this is like another blunder. This knight had a drop, and it was protecting this pawn from the line of sight of this queen. So when I moved my knight, it also it unprotected this pawn, and so my opponent took. But I took back using my a pawn, and my opponent moved his queen back. After I castled just to safeguard my king, and my opponent develops his knight, I move my knight, and my opponent castles. Now, as you can see here, because of my opponent's pawns, his king isn't very safe. So, like, I target that a lot during the course of this game. I push my pawn to d4 to try and kick out the queen. And as you can see here, I have control of this square, this square, this square, and this square. So like, I have lots of control over the center. And then, because my opponent moved his queen back just to d6, I was able to fork back my opponent. I was able to fork his queen and knight, which meant I got back my minor piece. So my opponent took my pawn and I took the knight. After that, my opponent pushed his c pawn. I just traded. And then I moved my knight to h5, trying to target these squares. I was thinking of going for a checkmate, or late of some sorts. Then my opponent developed his knight. I moved my queen to g4. My opponent moves his bishop to c8. I think he was maybe trying to create a discovered attack by pushing his pawn. I'm not sure. I pushed my h-pawn to target this pawn. Yeah, see, my opponent pushes his pawn, which is a discovered attack on my queen. So I bring my queen back, and then my opponent moves his knight to b4, which targets this pawn. I take his g5 pawn, and my opponent actually didn't take it, and that was a good move from my opponent, because if he took it, I would have taken it. He would move somewhere for check, and I would have checkmated him. So yeah, luckily my opponent didn't move his didn't take the pawn, but I just took his other pawn. Instead of taking back, which would have also been checkmate. Well, no, it wouldn't have, but it wouldn't have been a good idea. My opponent decided to attack my queen. And this is my big blunder, I moved my queen to d3, which just blunders it, as my opponent's knight can take. So, yeah, that was my big blunder. Instead, I should have just blocked the attack with my knight, I think. Yeah, so that was my big blunder. But my opponent didn't see that I blundered my queen. So my opponent took my pawn. And then I still didn't see that my knight was attacking my opponent's knight was attacking my queen. So I moved my knight to safety. And then I realized, I just blundered my queen. So I took back. My opponent moved his queen to c3, attacking my bishop and pawn. I took his f-pawn. My opponent blundered his rook by moving it to g7. So I forked his rook and king, which allowed me to take his rook. But that meant my opponent could take my pawn, which forked my bishop and my knight. Instead, I think I should have taken with my pawn so I could maybe promote to a queen. Could have. So yeah. But instead, my opponent managed to fork my bishop and knight. I moved my bishop out of the way and made it so it attacked my opponent's rook. This meant I had time to allow my knight to escape. My opponent attacks my knight again. Just move it. And then my opponent took my pawn. I attacked my queen while also defending the bishop. Queen moved there. Attacked the queen again. And I checked the king. The king moved to f4. Checked it again. Checked it again. Which forked the king and the bishop. This meant rook was also on this bishop. So yeah, I took it. Then the queen moved to g4. I took the pawn. Then my opponent's rook moves to h8, which covers this entire rank. I move my rook out of the way. Then my opponent moves to h3. And this means I'm one move my opponent can easily checkmate me from this position, like close, or it's close to checkmating me. So I check my opponent. I check my opponent again. I check my opponent again. So I'm trying to buy myself time. I check my opponent again. Another check. Another check. Another check. And then this is where I win, luckily, because my opponent's only move is to block with his queen. And I take, and it's checkmate. So yeah, that was a pretty intense game. And I very nearly lost it. It was very, very close. This is the second game I'm going to show you guys. And this game is where I finally got to 1000 elo on chess.com. However, it's really sad that this game, it ended in the 5 moves because my opponent resigned for no reason. And this is basically how it all went. Switching normal position, but then my opponent just resigned. And it's really, really sad because I was hoping that the end of my goal, like the game would be really, really tough and exciting, but no. It's really annoying because it seems like at the end of all my videos, the game which gets me to my goal, like getting to 800 or 900 elo, it's always really anticlimactic. Thank you guys for watching, and please like and subscribe so you can see other videos on my channel.